Hi, everyone. My name is Ben. I'm the director at the Reed Center for Ecosystem Reintegration. Um, basically what my talk today is going to be about is understanding human perception or our limitations in perception. And hopefully I can provide some tools that we can all use as environmentalists to help make the case for why we need some real changes in some of our communities, as well as overall in our ways in which we interact with the land around us. So I'm going to start out just by explaining that I think it's hard for us as a species to understand just how little we're able to perceive. For example, we're born into a circumstance in which the world, the systems that we utilize, those are the systems that we think have always existed. I'll give you a very specific example of that, which is whenever I go to schools and I'm talking to them about various environmental things that are happening around the world, and I go into Google and I do a quick search to show them cotton production in Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan. And I explained to them that when I was their age, I couldn't do what we just did. It blows their mind that I had to use an encyclopedia, a book that was written some number of years before, to learn about the various components of how the world works, cultural things. And so part of what we're going to be exploring today is just some of the new tools that exist, and some of the ways in which I think we can better understand the solutions that we can be striving for. So the first thing that I like to do is talk about our favorite plant. For me, my favorite plant is the fig tree. For those of you that don't know, in the Mid-Atlantic region, you can grow figs. You, in some areas, might have to plant it up against a south-facing wall to create a little microclimate. But this is a tree that grows around the world, and the tropical fig supports more life than any other plant on the entire planet, more diversity and more biomass of organisms. And so I want everybody to picture your favorite plant. I'll give you like 5-10 seconds to just picture it in your mind. And I wonder how many of you pictured the roots of your plant. It's interesting, I've done this around the world to people of all different ages and all different sectors of society. And I've only had a handful of people raise their hand and say, I pictured the roots. And when I asked them what the plant was, it's usually a root vegetable: potato. One person said beet, carrot, and radish were some of the answers that I've gotten. And the reason why I think it's so interesting that we don't perceive roots is that it just simply is out of our immediate perception. Despite the fact that you could make the argument that what we call a plant, what we call a tree, is actually the lesser important of the two. And what I mean by that is there are plenty of trees that we can cut down and the tree will just sprout back and grow. That's the majority of native trees in this region have that capacity to some varying levels. And so now try the reverse and cut the above ground part of a tree off, and very few plants, willows come to mind, that you could literally stick a willow branch into the ground and it'll actually set roots. But that's a very rare thing. But it's just to say that when we are perceiving the world around us, the things that actually make it possible for us to survive in this modern age are largely predicated on us being disconnected from the source of those things. I grew up thinking that water came from a tap, and that it was endless. I would go into my grandparents' kitchen and I'd go to wash my hands, and then I would just leave the faucet running. And, they would come in behind me and turn it off. And I just had no perception that that water had any value, or that it wasn't an endless supply. So today I'm going to largely talk about some of the things that make our lives possible, and hopefully give you guys some physical tools that you can use to help tell these stories as well. And first would be Google Earth. So in the continental United States, looking at agriculture and a story of economic efficiency, what we have found to be the most economically efficient models of agriculture is to create monocultures, which is to say that we take plants, animals that had context in nature as being part of an ecosystem, and in order to make them more efficient to grow, we take them out of that context and we put them by themselves in an area, and a farmer might strictly focus on that one sector. And the Central Valley of California is quite amazing. I mean, it's the most productive agricultural region in the history of humanity. And as we zoom in, you can see what we have largely done to the surface of Earth is part of that economic efficiency is to turn the Earth into squares, rectangles, and in some cases circles. We'll see some of that later. And it largely, to me, resembles an Excel spreadsheet. It's these squares that actually make it easier for farmers, landowners to be able to make predictive assumptions about what their yields might be, what are their inputs supposed to be. And the issue is that we have done this on aggregate across about 40% of the surface of land that we have on Earth. So part of what you're seeing here are dairy operations. There's some egg-laying operations, alfalfa. Some organic farms are going to be mixed into here as well. 90% of things like broccoli and strawberries that are produced in the United States are produced in this region. And one of the interesting things that I think people miss about agriculture is that agriculture is a mining process. We are taking the most nutrient-dense components of a field, and we are taking that most nutrient-dense component and shipping it off of that field and sending it either around the country or around the world. And when you're talking about a place like the Central Valley of California, when we're talking about like specific crops, dairy as an example, dairy is the process of taking water out of fossil water out of an aquifer that is being diminished very rapidly. Wells that went down 150 to 200 feet are now going down well over 1,000 to 2,000 feet. And the Colorado River, which we all know has been in crisis for a long time. And when you're looking at giving water to these cows, those cows then urinate some of that water out. The rest of it comes out in some form of, well, it comes out as milk, and then we turn it into some form of dairy, or leave it as milk and we ship it around the world. We're quite literally mining water from a water scarce region and exporting that. Almonds as an example as well. 85% of the world's almonds are being grown in the Central Valley of California. And so almonds being one of the burgeoning dairy alternatives, require about a gallon of water per almond. And that's assuming that you get 100% of your crop. If you have a storm that comes through during blossom season, a late frost that knocks off, some large percentage of your crop, you still have to irrigate it as if you are growing a full crop. When we look at the Corn Belt of the United States and just see in aggregate, when you see each one of these squares each one of these farms are taking different actions on their land, whether that's herbicides, fertilizers, pesticides. And on that individual piece of land, you may see some changes, collateral effects of those decisions. But in aggregate, when you aggregate all of that land and all of those actions, and you follow the water flows down the Mississippi River, the collateral effects are seen in much bigger detail with enormous dead zones. And we largely are growing corn as animal feed and ethanol. Again, it's important for us to look at the context by which we started eating animals in the first place as a species, that they were able to eat things in the landscapes that we weren't able to consume, and then we were able to consume them. By aggregating them, we can do these things much more economically, efficiently, but the consequences are quite dramatic in terms of methane releases and other things. And while this might sound disparaging perhaps towards the agricultural sector, I think it's really important for us to recognize that as farmers, our lives are not really well understood, in that we're the only job in the United States that does not have a minimum wage. The pressure on agriculturalists around the world are so intense that one of the things that I started realizing in my work around the world was that what we're calling urbanization is largely a refugee migration from rural areas. For some of us, it doesn't feel like that because, we just got a job in the city and we moved to the city. But in many places around the world, people will live in informal settlements, sometimes referred to as slums, favelas, go down the list, to have access to the internationally recognized currency that urban areas bring. And in fact, I think it's important to remember that the things we do in urban areas are often deemed to have more monetary value per hour than certainly the things that we have in the agricultural world that make urban life possible. So in that corn belt, where we see these massive monocultures of corn, sometimes a rotation of soy, it's important for us to remember how differently the earth works when you have a giant region of corn comparatively to what existed there before. These are some of the grasses that would have been represented in the Great Savannas or Great Plains, as many people know them, in the Midwest. And these grasses, many of them perennial, would have roots that could extend down, in many cases, 35 feet or more into the earth. So in times of drought, in times of flood, and in times of fire, many of these root systems would be able to persist through those climactic events. Now, one of the biggest issues that we have is the desiccation of land, that land is no longer able to hold water. So we talk about drought almost as like this one-dimensional thing where, it's whether or not it rains. But there's also soil drought. And in a system where these plants are able to grow with such deep roots, these roots become a path of least resistance for water to penetrate deeper into the soil and feed microbiology that actually holds that water into these upper reaches of the soil, making that water available much longer into, say, a prolonged climactic event of less rain. Likewise, when we look at the difference of how we move across land on tractors and the level of compaction that we create, it's something called a plow pan. under most agricultural lands that are using tractors, the weight of the tractors, when we plow, we're loosening up the upper reaches of the soil for roots to be able to grow. But at that point of 20 to 28, even up to 30 inches, there will be a compaction called a plow pan that does not allow water and oxygen to penetrate, or roots for that matter. And so in aggregate, when water hits and runs through the loose soil that's been tilled, or even in a no-till system where there's a compaction layer below, that water gets held right at that compaction layer. In flat ground, that means you'll experience root rot and disease. In hilly land, what that means is the water will start migrating down with gravity on that compaction layer and create momentum that creates these huge erosion gullies. Now, we are starting to use practices that are less invasive to the soil, but a lot of them are predicated on herbicides, which have their own collateral effects that I'm not going to go into in detail. So another form of erosion, just a couple of weeks ago, maybe many of you heard of the dust storm that caused the enormous accident in the Midwest. Some hundreds of vehicles crashed and a number of people died. This is becoming an annual event where we have dust bowls like this one in Phoenix that's over 1.25 miles. These are agricultural soils. This is a direct cause of soil that is no longer being held together. And not only is this a dust bowl, but unlike the dust bowls of our grandparents and great-grandparents, these dust bowls contain all of the particulate of agricultural additives. So that includes fertilizers, pesticides, and the like. So if you look at the different biomes that we have that make it possible for us to survive, we're growing on about 40% of it. And we've even started moving into desert areas around the world. And one of the things that I wanted to show everyone is, and I'm going to see if I can do this technologically. There we go. Is Google Earth time lapse. Google Earth time lapse is such a profound tool. It's the first time in human history that we can see the multi-generational collateral effects of our collective decision making. This is West Virginia. You can pause it and go back and forth. This is 1984. This is 2020. But I just wanted to show this tool to everyone because I think that unlike climate change, where we're talking about invisible molecules and parts per million and numbers and tools to represent what is happening, what you can see on this tool is in aggregate, an alteration to the Earth's surface and the vital life systems that we all rely upon in a way that we've never been able to see before. What you are seeing right here is mountaintop removal in West Virginia. And again, that's 1984. And now in the present, the amount of mountains that have been taken away through this process is larger than the surface area of the state of Delaware. And so again, one of the great things about this tool, you can pause at 1984 and go all the way to 2020. The NASA scientists that worked with the Google tech folks have pre-selected a number of different areas that they think are particularly valuable for us to see. And you can go ahead and click those and they will take you to these different regions, such as the drying up of the Aral Sea, the 4th largest lake in the world. And we can zoom in to see the causal link. This is cotton production, largely cotton production in these canalways off of the major riverways that were feeding the Aral Sea. Likewise, you'll see right here at the top, there's imagery from 2020 and 2021 on Google Earth. When you go into Google Earth, they have all of these spaces that allow you to look at changing forests. That's deforestation and reforestation projects around the world. Forgive the bandwidth since I'm on this, you're not able to see, but you'll see on the bottom right, there's 11 different places that they will take you around the world. Again, you can see things like the most important forest we have on Earth, the Amazon, being turned into a giant soy plantation over time. So with that, I'm gonna go back just to my presentation one more time and just quickly go through a few more slides, if I can quickly. And say that soil microbiology, understanding the mycorrhizal networks, these fungal networks that actually make it possible for forest ecosystems to persist. This is one of the things that we are working most against in our land management practices. And these fungal networks are connecting various trees, the primary immune system for many, and also the primary digestive force that actually feeds ecosystems. What we're advocating for at the Reed Center is Victory Gardens 2.0. Victory Gardens were a federal process, federal program to help us decentralize our food system and produce radical amounts of food, so much that they say 50% of the food consumed in the late 40s into the early 50s came right out of Victory Gardens. And we can do this again with the caveat that this was predicated on a one income household. Part of what my work is involving is helping us grow more food with less effort, using perennial plants. These are vertical gardening systems that I designed and patented. We also create food forest systems. For those of you that are not familiar with food forests, these are forests that are able to produce up to 120 vertical feet of food with diverse yields throughout the year, not just a single yield at one time. And the system takes care of itself. It produces all of its own nitrogen. It supports wildlife and biodiversity, and simultaneously can produce far more bionutrient dense food, which is the unit of food that really matters. Creating polycultures in our own gardens, reintegrating animals into those systems, and that includes our kids. And lastly, let's see if please go to the next slide. Come on, slide. How about slide? No slide. I guess it just wants you to see my kids. I was gifted a 150-acre parcel of land that we are now turning into a radically diverse agroforestry and food forestry research site. And if I could go to the next slide. Oh, here we go. We have planted now 40 acres into that system, and we're on our way to about 1.4 million plants. We've planted 1/10 of that so far. And it's important for us to remember that not only are these systems highly functional, but they can actually be quite beautiful. And people really enjoy being in the space. We have hundreds of volunteers that allow us to do this. This is our Tree of Life planting. This is our latest research project. It's 15 acres. It looks like a giant tree of life from space. Everything that you harvest in December through March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, we're planting every species of edible and medicinal plant that could possibly grow in our region, and we're developing markets around rare and ecological foods. So I'll just go ahead and stop there, and I would love to answer any questions that people have. Let's see, I'm going into the chat. I guess I'm going to do my own reading of the Q&A. I'm going to stop my share. All right. Oh, willow was the plant you were thinking. That's great. Any questions? I'm not seeing any questions specifically. So I'll just say that one of the most amazing things about the study of ecosystem functionality and the role that humans can have. We all know the negative consequences that we as a species can have on the land around us. I mean, we're inundated with the kind of doom scrolling. And one of the interesting things is that when we look at our ability to bring diversity into a space, like right now, I think of the piece of land that I'm on as a refugee camp for insects and birds that are not, they have no food supplies from the surrounding farms that are now completely barren as they're preparing to put in their corn crop. And that's the case for most of the year. It's a space of no food supply. Part of what I am doing in this space is bringing a level of diversity that has actually never existed here. At no point in history has there been this amount of diversity of plants. And I'm talking prehistoric, pre-human, pre-indigenous peoples. And that being said, it's also important for us to remember that indigenous peoples in the Mid-Atlantic region had created an agro-ecosystem. That 1 out of every 4 trees through most of this region were chestnuts, understories of strawberries. Yes, we hear about the 3 sisters, but the perennial food infrastructure that indigenous peoples created was perhaps the largest in the entire world. In the Amazon, there's a hyperdominance of cultivated fruit and nut species in areas that haven't been occupied by humans in over 450 years. Uncontacted tribe footage that they get from aerial footage shows these villages in the Amazon completely surrounded by all kinds of edible fruit and nut species. We can actually accomplish these things that meets the environmental imperatives and simultaneously the acute needs of humans. Reforestation for reforestation's sake is failing around the world because it's not meeting the needs of communities that those systems are planted next to. I see some questions
in the chat.
Yes. Are you doing things like cover cropping to reduce inputs? In fact, yes, we do some cover cropping, especially in beds where we're growing annual plants. I'm not going to get too deep into this, but annual plants only, if you look at the context from where annual plants can dominate in ecosystems, it's only in places in which there are regular natural disasters. So when we have farms, we're basically mimicking natural disasters by creating floodplains, burning, plowing, or herbicide. Cover crops can be very, very helpful in reducing the collateral effects of those things. I also, in my polycultural food forests, we allow all kinds of quote unquote weeds to grow, and some of which we'll chop and drop and use as fertilizer and living mulches, and others of which are bringing in diverse insects and birds that never allows one insect to dominate our ecosystem. Therefore, if we do have pests, they're not going to wipe out the entirety of our crop, but instead we have all kinds of predatory animals that can eat all kinds of insects, including our pest insects. Let's see. Do you focus on native plants for your ecoregion? Absolutely. 99% of what we planted, more than 99%, have been native and all have some edible or medicinal or other ecological function. And we are creating a database to show the ecological and human uses for all of these plants. Let's see. Is there an outreach program for others who have land and are interested in local growth ideas? I am very happy to do that. We have classes here. I'm also happy to hop on a Zoom. I'm Ben at thereedcenter.org. Would love to answer any questions and talk to anybody that is wanting to get started on this. How is this project progressing as compared to what you imagined? I'm learning a lot. The quote unquote invasive species or maladapted species, that I like to call them, are profound, and to not use Roundup and to learn different interventions that we could do to say slow down bittersweet from killing young trees. It's been a huge learning process in that regard, but the community support has been unbelievable. The amount of people that we have coming through the site, wanting to plant trees, wanting to camp, has been really, really beautiful. And it's happened way faster than I anticipated, for sure. Thank you so much for allowing me to take this time.